I'm Bret Baier in Washington, and this is a Fox News alert. The coalition has been pounding with airstrikes this evening in Libya. Fox confirms there was also responding anti-aircraft fire there. We can now confirm that one of Moammar Qaddafi's compounds was hit with one of these airstrikes, but at this time it's unclear which one. There has been new firing on the ground in Tripoli. Meanwhile, Qaddafi's forces are massing around the rebel-held city of Qaddafi. Pro-Qaddafi forces had captured that oil-rich city while trying to crush dissent there early last week, I should say, but have since been beaten back by these coalition airstrikes. New strikes again on the ground in Tripoli, and that's where we find correspondent Steve Harrigan with the latest from the Libyan capital. Hello, Steve.
We expected that perhaps the pace of attacks would slow here on night 5, but it is anything but that. Over the last 2 hours, off to my right, we have heard several loud incoming explosions. That is, of course, in the direction of Colonel Qaddafi's compound, and it was just last night that Qaddafi himself made an appearance there before his human shields. Of course, Pentagon officials have said Qaddafi is not a target. We also know that the strikes now coming from airplanes, they're not coming from cruise missiles anymore because the defense systems have been knocked out, allowing those fighter jets to come in and come in low. As far as the battle with Qaddafi forces, the focus now is on the city of Qaddafi. That city has changed hands several times over the past 2 weeks, a key city for its highway network. The target now is Qaddafi government tanks and mechanized vehicles outside that city. They are still targeting civilians, so coalition forces are targeting those Qaddafi tanks. As far as that no-fly zone, it now extends boundary to boundary, no more Libyan airspace. And according to one British military official, the Libyan Air Force is no longer in the fight. Bret, back to you.
Steve, quickly, we talk about anti-aircraft fire. As these strikes happen and they try to take out some of that ability by Qaddafi, are you still seeing the fire going back up and trying to attack these planes?
Bret, we have been seeing anti-aircraft fire, and I can tell you today, driving around the city with government monitors, we are still seeing a lot of anti-aircraft batteries out there. But these are small batteries, manually operated, often on the back of pickup trucks. They don't have radar, so it's going to take a lucky or a miracle shot to hit one of these fighter jets.
Steve Harrigan live in Tripoli. Steve, thank you. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton stopped short of delivering an ultimatum, but gave a clear indication of what it would take for Qaddafi to end the Libyan crisis. National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin has the latest on the mission from the Pentagon. Jennifer.
Hi, Bret. And the Pentagon has said they will not go after all of those mobile anti-aircraft units that Steve Harrigan was just describing. Early this morning, President Obama spoke to and consulted with U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, as well as Admiral Mike Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, to discuss the ongoing situation in Libya. A White House spokesman said the enforcement of the no-fly zone is now being taken on by coalition partners, but contributions by those coalition partners are still being discussed and negotiated.
The coalition may have broadened. French warplanes flying off the aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, joined by Greek and Danish warplanes, patrolled the skies over Libya. 4 Qatari jets were still en route. But a senior defense official told Fox it was still U.S. warplanes that did more than 90% of the bombing runs or combat air patrol missions overnight. The Tomahawk cruise missile phase of the conflict is in effect over, according to the defense official, who said the U.S. has less expensive ways to attack any leftover air defenses. Meanwhile, Moammar Qaddafi continues to taunt the coalition. "I am here, I am here, I am here," he said, standing outside his family compound in downtown Tripoli last night. The coalition continued to insist he was not a target, but said he must go.
So Qaddafi has a decision to make, and the people around him each have decisions to make. The quickest way for him to end this is to actually serve the Libyan people by leaving.
U.S. commanders say they are not coordinating airstrikes with opposition forces. Defense Secretary Gates was asked if there are efforts to mediate the conflict.
Qaddafi has basically sworn that he will show no mercy to anybody who has been in opposition. That's not exactly an invitation to negotiate. This matter, at the end of the day, is going to have to be settled by Libyans.
Fighting continued in Qaddafi and Misrata, and reports that Qaddafi forces had pulled back were false, according to an American vice admiral on board the USS Mount Whitney.
There's no indication that Qaddafi's forces are pulling back from Misrata or Qaddafi.
U.S. officials said they still plan to hand over command and control of the mission in a matter of days.
So the United States will continue to support this mission as we transfer command and control to NATO.
According to the Rear Admiral who serves as the Chief of Staff of the Joint Task Force in charge of the bombing, he says that they have no confirmed reports of any civilian casualties at this time. Brett?
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon tonight. Jennifer, thank you. At the bottom of the hour, James Rosen reports on the high-level talks taking place right now between American and Libyan officials. U.S. involvement in Libya has so far been hard to define. And some on Capitol Hill are asking, what exactly is the mission and what comes next? White House correspondent Wendell Goler looks for answers. Wendell.
Brett, the president's aides say the broad international coalition enforcing the UN Security Council resolution on Libya has both increased its legitimacy and lowered our cost, but it has also made it more difficult to answer some fundamental questions about the mission. As the president returned from a 5-day South and Central America trip begun the day he announced military action in Libya, Congress and the administration debated whether we're at war in that country.
I don't know what you want to call it, Wendell, but I guarantee you that nobody in Libya is mistaking our seriousness.
I would say it's a combat mission, clearly, but beyond that, you can parse that out.
When you start a war, you need to have one overall commander, and you need to define the war aims of the United States clearly before the American people in an address from the Oval Office.
Sources say a Capitol Hill briefing on the Libya mission Tuesday left lawmakers in both parties unclear about what comes next and how the administration defines success. In a letter to Congress Monday, Mr. Obama said limited U.S. military action, quote, will set the stage for further action by other coalition partners. While administration officials say they will turn over the actual operation of the no-fly zone to NATO shortly, it's still unclear exactly what role the U.S. will play. Former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld suspects that's why the White House didn't ask Congress for its approval.
They didn't know what to ask for. They didn't know precisely with clarity and sufficient precision what it is they wanted the Congress to approve.
Actually, Congress has been on vacation since the mission began, and while aides say he would welcome lawmakers' support,
the president's very clear that the United States is acting in a way that is within the existing authorities available to him.
The War Powers Act gives presidents 2 days to wage military action without notifying Congress and 2 months to continue it without congressional approval, though neither presidents nor Congress members have felt bound by it. In 2007, when George W. Bush threatened to confront Iran for supporting insurgents in Iraq, then Senator Joe Biden drew a line in the sand.
And I want to make it clear, and I made it clear to the president, that if he takes this nation to war in Iran without congressional approval, I will make it my business to impeach him.
Of course, Biden was a presidential hopeful then, and no one is now calling for President Obama's impeachment, but House Speaker John Boehner has called on him to provide, quote, a clear and robust assessment of the scope, objective, and purpose of our mission in Libya and how it will be achieved. Brett?
Wendell, thank you. Senior political analyst Bret Hume has some thoughts on the role or lack of one for Congress in all of this. Good evening, Bret.
Hi, Brett. Congress has not issued a declaration of war since World War II, and the question of what kind of military action a president can or cannot take without one has been up in the air ever since. The problem is that while Congress alone has authority to declare war, the president alone is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. After the U.S. got into protracted conflicts in Korea and Vietnam with no declaration of war, Congress tried to draw some boundaries when it passed the War Powers Resolution in 1973. It set requirements for congressional notification and approval of any use of military force. But it passed over Richard Nixon's veto, and no president since has acknowledged the law's constitutionality. Still, a succession of presidents has sought congressional authority for major military actions. President Bush 41, for instance, got congressional approval for the first Gulf War, and his son did the same for the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. The best argument for doing so is not legal, but political. Wars, even small and limited ones, can be politically corrosive, and a president is on safer ground if Congress has approved. And such approval is a signal of unity to the enemy that can be militarily helpful. So far, President Obama has not asked Congress to bless his Libya adventure, but he would be wise to do so, not least because it would bring his current actions more into line with his and his vice president's previous pronouncements. Brett?
Well, what about then Senator Biden's pronouncements that the president has no constitutional authority to take the nation into war unless it's being attacked or there's evidence that it could be attacked?
Well, the president said that. Those comments reflected to some extent in what you just heard from Senator Biden about an Iran adventure that never happened. It's kind of classic shoe on the other foot disease, which is a Washington malady that occurs frequently. People go out, leave one office for another, and see things from a different perspective. And this is what you see. Now, it all comes down, I think, to questions of, what is war? And this ain't peace. But this situation in Libya is not all-out war either.
Britt, thank you.
Bet.
Which newly elected governor may be a little technologically limited? That's later in the grapevine. But first, the impact of the health care law on the president's re-election chances and the GOP field. It's been 1 year since President Obama signed the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, better known as the federal health care law. Chief political correspondent Carl Cameron examines its potential impact on the 2012 presidential race.
We should repeal Obamacare.
Repeal Obamacare.
Repeal Obamacare. That would be a good win.
With the GOP determined to undo the president's health care law, Mr. Obama knows his 2012 re-election will be a tough referendum on him and his Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act.
The Obama administration is stonewalling serious rethinking of this bill because in the form it came through and in the way they wrote it, it is clearly an indefensible bill.
A year ago, Mr. Obama and Democrats predicted after becoming law, the Health Care Act would be more popular. Not so much. More than half the states are now suing over its constitutionality, and the latest Gallup poll suggests it's less popular than a year ago.
If there's a constant in the story of Obamacare, it's broken promises.
Federal health spending is estimated to go up more than $450 billion over the next decade.
The conservative think tank Crossroads GPS filed federal lawsuit today against the administration for failure to comply with Freedom of Information Act requests for over 1,000 waivers, half of which have been granted to labor unions, letting them and some other organizations and businesses opt out of the plan until at least 2014. Mitt Romney says if he were president, he'd give all 50 states waivers. It's a touchy subject for him. As governor of Massachusetts, he signed the health care law, which, like Obama's national one, mandates coverage and fines for noncompliance, a fact Romney cannot escape.
I agree with Mitt Romney, who recently said he's proud of what he accomplished on health care.
Romney's on defense in the early voting states.
Our experiment wasn't perfect. Some things worked, some things didn't.
some things I changed.
Now that he's resigned as the Obama administration's ambassador to China, former Utah Governor John Huntsman's hiring campaign staff who tout his signature into law of a Utah health reform that had no mandates. But Huntsman didn't support them initially. The Republican White House hopefuls would all repeal and replace the health care law with market-based health reforms. Tim Pawlenty, the only major contender officially exploring a run, issued a statement today calling it, quote, one of the most flawed and misguided laws in modern history.
President Obama has said more than once that he'd be willing to risk being a one-term president in order to pass health care reform into law. Republicans are virtually certain to nominate an opponent committed to beating him and repealing it. Brett?
Carl, thank you. In the final installment of his three-part series, Chief Washington correspondent Jim Engel looks at what the health care law means in terms of doctor availability.
Ensuring 32 million more people won't work well if they can't get a doctor, and many say the U.S. is facing a growing shortage.
And that is going to put tremendous pressure on the system to handle all the new people that are enrolled.
The Association of American Medical Colleges estimates that by 2015 there will be a shortage of more than 62,000 doctors. By 2020, more than 91,000. And by 2025, more than 130,000. One analyst said the health care law is like giving everyone a free bus pass, but without enough buses.
If you cover them all, it gives them the pass. But then you then have to connect that to a workforce solution that appropriately provides that access of care to them.
There are several reasons for the shortage. First, 10,000 baby boomers retire every day, and seniors use more health care. Second, many doctors are boomers themselves, and a third are expected to retire in the next 10 years. On top of all that is the new health care law, which would expand